What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So, of course, it is Thursday, and if you've been following this page for a while, you know on Thursdays we do our weekly redraft. We started with 2020. Last week we did 2014, so it is time for the 2013 draft. Pretty solid draft overall. Couple superstars, couple high-level players. This was the initial top 10. McKinnon, Barkov, Druin, Jones, Lindholm, Monahan, Nurse, Ristolainen, Horvat, and Etrushkin. So kind of like a loaded top 10. Besides Jonathan Druin, these guys all at one point were like very high-end players in Ristolainen. So it is a pretty loaded top 10. So some of those guys are obviously going to stay in the top 10. Some of them are going to get bumped out. And we're going to be switching up the order of us doing this. We're going to start with one and work our way down. A lot of people suggested that. And I think especially with this draft, if you saw the top 10 there, it is pretty obvious who's first and second in this redraft. So instead of counting down and then like when you get to the final two picks, you're like, I kind of know who it's going to be. When you think about like 2014 with Draisaitl and Pasta, 2015 McDavid was obviously number one. We're going to start with number one and then work our way down. So you kind of like don't even know who's coming at like 8th, 9th, 10th overall. And then at the end, I'm going to give my honorable mentions to guys that just barely missed out. So without further ado, first overall, Colorado Avalanche initially took Nathan MacKinnon. I have them taking still Nathan MacKinnon, of course. Nathan MacKinnon, he took a while to develop. Even in his fourth season, he still had 53 points. People thought that he was going to be this massive disappointment considering his first season, he had 63 points, won the Calder. But then the following year in 2017, 2018, goes for 97 points in 74 games. Hart runner-up, might have won it if he played 80, 81, 82 games. Lost it to Taylor Hall, and since that season, in the following like 6 or 7 seasons since then, he has 651 points in 469 games, which equals out to 114-point pace every single season. In that stretch, he's been a Hart finalist 3 times. Probably going to get another Hart finalist this year, maybe finally win it. So he has no doubt basically been a top 5 player in the NHL since that 2018 season. Really not a debate, even though I love the guy at number 2. Not much of a debate. Has won a Stanley Cup, got the playoff success, all those narratives before about him maybe not being a winner. Absolutely out of the window. He is a no doubt Hall of Famer. If he wins a Hart, I think he's probably tracking to be a top 30 player of all time. I don't think that that's that ridiculous. Maybe he'll get screwed because his first 4 years weren't that productive in terms of career stats, but fantastic. No doubt. First overall in this selection. Next up, Florida Panthers initially took Alexander Barkov. They're going to be taking Barkov yet again. And when looking at it, Barkov, in their first 4 years, Barkov's third year, they both went immediately to the NHL. But Barkov, his third and fourth season was far better than MacKinnon. He had 59 points in 66 games, 52 points in 61 games. I was only like 15 or 16, but like there was narratives that Barkov was better than MacKinnon. Barkov might just be the straight up better player, was better defensively. Obviously, then MacKinnon just took that next step. But Barkov, since then, also has improved. Has basically been a consistent 90 to 95 point guy for the most part. One of the best two-way centers in the entire NHL. Obviously, has that one Selke win, tracking to probably be a finalist this year, maybe even win it. Peaked in 2022 on that President's Trophy team in terms of offensively, 39 goals, 49 assists for 88 points in 67 games. That is an absolutely bonkers stat line, especially considering how good he is defensively. So going forward, Barkov should stay a top 15 player in the entire NHL for the next 3-4 years at the bare minimum until he gets into his early 30s. Just an absolutely fantastic player and a no doubt second overall pick in this redraft. Starts to get interesting at third overall. Tampa initially took Jonathan Drouin. Obviously, eventually traded him for Sergachev. They went on to go win Stanley Cups. Was the right trade, but not the right pick. I have them taking Jake Gensel, with Drouin not really panning out as that future left wing. Obviously, Jake Gensel did pan out to be that amazing left wing. It did take him a little bit longer than some of the other guys in this draft, but basically from 2018 on, he's been a pretty reliable around 40 and 40 guy. Him, Point, and Kucherov on the first line would be one of the most disgusting first lines, I wouldn't say in NHL history, but definitely probably the best line in all of hockey. Yeah, honestly, screw it. It would be one of the best lines ever assembled, period. When looking at it, either he plays on that top line or plays with Steven Stamkos on that second line. Tampa probably still wins their 2 Stanley Cups with the Jake Gensel, especially if they were able to lock him up on his 5-year, $6 million per contract that the Penguins were able to do back in like 2019. That was a fantastic deal. And maybe they even win a 3rd Stanley Cup versus the Avalanche when they were banged up if they had a guy like Jake Gensel. So he's pretty safely number 3, especially when you look at the number 4 guy. There's really not much of an argument given team need. The Gensel goes 3rd overall to the Tampa Bay Lightning. 4th overall, the Nashville Predators initially took Seth Jones. I have them taking UC Saros, who they took in this draft, 99th overall, got an absolute steal, but instead they use a top 5 pick on UC Saros. He obviously was the natural successor to Pecorine, and has followed through on that. Last 3 seasons before this year had a 920 in 167 games. Not having the best season this year, but I still think he's easily a top 10 goalie in the entire NHL. In my opinion, he's either like the 5th or the 6th still. So when looking at UC Saros, they still get him in this redraft. They needed that next successor to Pecorine. Maybe you could say they'd opt for a more NHL ready guy because they were more competitive from like 2015 to 2019. But I think UC Saros is so far ahead of the other guys on the list, like 5 through 10. It is pretty up in the air, but I think you lock up that elite goaltender that has been fantastic for your team. And you know that he will work on your team. So when looking at UC Saros, he goes 4th overall. 5th overall, the Canes initially took Elias Lindholm. I have them taking another center in Bo Horvat. Bo Horvat was a pretty good player early on when he was like 21, 22 years old. He was already around the 55 to 60 point pace center. Was that for multiple years, around 60-ish point guy. Last year explodes for 38 goals, 32 assists, 70 points in 79 games. Struggled a little bit on the Islanders, so we thought, oh, that's just his career year, but not really. He has been a good number 1 center for the Islanders this year as well. 23 points, 27 games. 23 goals, 27 assists for 50 points in 57 games. He has established himself as a legit, I would argue, top 20 center in the entire NHL. A true number 1 two-way guy, just such a high IQ guy. I love him on my team. Great leader. So in looking at it, the Carolina Hurricanes, although he might not be a superstar number 1 center on a cup contender, they got that eventually in Sebastian Aho. So I think pairing Sebastian Aho with a Bo Horvat, the Carolina Hurricanes would just be absolutely cooking in general. But again, 5 through 10 is going to be really tough. This is not easy by any means. Next up, 6th, the Flames initially took Sean Monahan. I have them taking Shea Theodore. Shea Theodore really exploded as soon as he got left unprotected by the Anaheim Ducks. When looking at it, first 2 seasons in Vegas was around the 40-ish point pace guy for the Golden Knights on that Stanley Cup run, a massive piece of that. Then the following 2 seasons after that, finished 6th in the Norris back-to-back years. He was a legit borderline top 10 defenseman in the entire NHL. In the following 3 seasons, he's been one of the best offensive defensemen in the entire league. So when looking at it, he had the early success at like 22, 23 that some of the other guys I'm going to mention later maybe lack, as well as the fact that he now is still an elite player. He has dealt with some injuries. This year only played 24 games, but he has 26 points. Last year only played like high 50s, I believe. So in looking at Shea Theodore, I think with the Calgary Flames, who were a highly competitive team in 2018, 2019, adding Shea Theodore would definitely help them then, as well as in 2022. He would be kind of borderline their number 1 defenseman. Him and Rasmus Anderson would be a fantastic top pair for the Calgary Flames for the most part. So I think Shea Theodore goes here, considering I think he's very underrated at this point. And when looking at his injury history, it's just these 2 seasons for the most part. Beyond that, he has been healthy. So I don't think that this is going to be like a chronic thing going forward, although it is a little bit concerning. I think he has the best track record out of any defenseman in this draft overall. I'm very high in Shea Theodore personally. I think if Pietrangelo, although he's good in his own right, I think if Shea Theodore had more rope to run with on the Vegas Golden Knights, he would be widely regarded as maybe a top 15 defenseman in the entire NHL. So next up, 7th overall, the Oilers initially took Darnell Nurse. I have them taking another defenseman, Mackenzie Weegar. Flames fans, look away. I know this would be your worst nightmare, but when looking at Weegar, unlike a Shea Theodore, he took a while to develop. He was not a high-end player until like 2021 with the Florida Panthers, but since then, he has been around a top 12 to 20 defensemen in the entire NHL. Doesn't have the most juicy offensive numbers because he doesn't get a shit ton of power play time, but just so fantastic defensively while also putting up a respectable like 45 to 50 points. There was one year in Florida, maybe I think it was the 2022 year, where he was a legit probably top 10 defenseman in the entire NHL. And when looking at the Edmonton Oilers, they could have used a guy like a Mackenzie Weegar from 2021 to now, and looking overall balancing out their defense core instead of relying on guys like Tyson Barrie to play somewhat big minutes. You get a guy like Weegar that's so responsible 2 ways, then you can just let Bouchard kind of just be that offensive defenseman. Weegar more so your overall number 1. I think that would have been very successful for the Edmonton Oilers, so they go with Weegar in this spot. 8th overall, the Buffalo Sabres initially took Rasmus Ristolainen. I have them taking Pavel Buchnevich. Buchnevich, although he did take a little bit of time to develop into a star, he was a solid player. Back in 2017, had 43 points in 74 games on the Rangers, hovered for like 3-4 years around 50 to 55-ish points pace, was a very good player, but obviously his final season in New York really broke out, 48 points in 54 games. for the New York Rangers. Then he got traded for Sammy Blaine, a second-round pick. And since he got to St. Louis, he has 191 points in 193 games. In my opinion, has been around, outside of maybe this season, but the prior 2 seasons, around a top 45 to top 60 player in the entire NHL. Just so smart, so skilled, and very good both ways. I'm very high on him. So when looking at the Sabres, they don't really need a kind of like a high-impact guy right away, considering they sucked from 2013 up until still kind of stink. But they don't really need from 2013 to 2020. They don't really need like a Lindholm or a Monahan who kind of peaked earlier on. They kind of need a Buchnevich that came around and now is kind of in the thick of his prime and is a top 60 player probably in the entire NHL. So I think for the Buffalo Sabres, they opt for more of a Buchnevich than more of those early risers like the guys that I mentioned. Next up, 9th overall, Canucks obviously took Bo Horvat. He's off the board. I have them taking Josh Morrissey. Josh Morrissey from around 2018 to 2022 was a solid around half a point per game guy. Nothing too special. He was a very solid two-way player, but obviously last year was his breakout season, 76 points in 78 games. This year backing it up with not the same level of production, was not sustainable in my opinion, but he has 46 points in 57 games. He has established himself as a solid number 1 at this point. And I think him and Hughes, although kind of smaller defensemen, I think they could obviously work together, not on the same pair, but like they're both very capable defensively, where it's not going to be an absolute, two of your pairs have a defensive liability. That's not really the case with the Vancouver Canucks. And when looking at the Canucks, similarly to the Sabres, they don't really need a Lindholm or Monahan that was better earlier on. The Canucks kind of stunk from like 2015 to 2020. So Morrissey, a guy that really only broke out fully last year, I think works more on a Canucks team that is now ascending, now is an elite team, compared to success in 2017, 2018. Didn't really matter for the Vancouver Canucks because they were kind of rebuilding, tanking at that point. And then lastly, 10th overall, the Dallas Stars took Valeri Nichushkin, who looked like a massive bust back in like 2019, 2020. I have them taking Elias Lindholm. When looking at it, he was one of those guys that was ready right out of the gate at the NHL level. At 20 years old, he had 39 points in 82 games, went on to be a solid 60, 70 point guy over, not in Carolina, but he was like 50-ish points in Carolina. Then once he got to Calgary, really started to break out, peaked around 42 goals, 40 assists for 82 points in that 2022 season. Obviously, was kind of like the third wheel of that line with Gaudreau and Tkachuk. But when looking at it, I think that he does fit Dallas in the sense that Dallas was a competitive team in the mid to late 2010s and the early 2020s. So when looking at a Lindholm, him being the second line center behind a Tyler Seguin, I think that they maybe could have gone on a couple more deep runs, 2020 Cup run, and maybe do. I mean, they kind of got dummied by Lightning, but they would definitely be more competitive in that series with the Lindholm. So they opt for more of an NHL ready guy. Although Lindholm's play has kind of deteriorated in the last 3 years, I think it makes more sense for them to go for a Lindholm than a Nichushkin, a late riser, or like a Carter Verhaeghe. Speaking of honorable mentions, we got Carter Verhaeghe. Just again, it wasn't even an NHLer until 2022. Nichushkin wasn't a high-level NHLer until like 2022. Verhaeghe 2021, Nichushkin 2022, and also player assistant stuff at the end of the playoffs last year when he got kicked off the team. I'm just staying away from that. Sean Monahan, you could definitely make an argument that maybe Dallas should go for Sean Monahan, who's amazing in the mid to late 2010s. Not amazing, but like actually like a high-end, not a high-end, but a medium-end first-line center. But the injury risk is still there for me, although he has kind of had a resurgence, especially of late. Darnell Nurse, just no. He'd be in a top 20, not a top 10. Tristan Jarry, a little bit too inconsistent from game to game. Has solid stats overall, but also plays on the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have been a solid team throughout his tenure. And Oliver Bjorkstrand, very nice player, but not going to crack this list overall. Here's the final. McKinnon, Barkov, Gensel, Soros, Horvat, Theodore, Uyghur, Buchnevich, Morrissey, and Lindholm. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? And I'll be seeing the next one.